The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the parched dirt street of El Dorado Canyon, Nevada, as Gwendolyn Nelson clutched the eviction notice with trembling hands. 24 hours, that's all the time she and her family had left before they would be thrown out of the only home they'd ever known, their debts finally coming to collect after her father's untimely passing 6 months ago. The year was 1875, and times were hard for a young woman of 22 with no husband and a sickly mother and younger brother to care for. The drought had destroyed what little crops they'd managed to grow, and her father's gambling debts had mounted higher than the distant Sierra Nevada mountains that overlooked their struggling town. "There must be something we can do," Gwendolyn whispered, the paper crinkling in her grip as she paced their small wooden kitchen. Her mother, Eleanor, sat at the table, her once beautiful face now gaunt and lined with worry. "Mr. Hargrove was quite clear, Gwen. Either we pay the $500 by noon tomorrow, or we lose everything." $500 might as well have been 5,000. It was an impossible sum for a family who couldn't even afford medicine for her 16-year-old brother Timothy's worsening cough. "I'll think of something," Gwendolyn promised, though her heart felt as hollow as their nearly empty pantry. As the evening deepened into night, a knock at the door startled the family. Gwendolyn opened it to find Josephine Walsh, the wife of the town's gossip-loving shopkeeper. "Evening, Gwen," she said, her eyes alight with the thrill of sharing news. "I heard about your predicament. Terrible business, just terrible, but I might have a solution for you." Gwendolyn invited her in, desperate for any hope. "There's a newcomer in town," Josephine continued, settling her ample frame into a chair. "Arrived just last week. Name's Fletcher O'Malley. Got himself a fine ranch about 10 miles outside town. Word is he's looking for a wife. And how does that help us?" Gwendolyn asked, already feeling uneasy about where this conversation was headed. "Well," Josephine leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "he's got money, lots of it, and he's willing to pay off a family's debt in exchange for a bride." The room fell silent. Gwendolyn's mother gasped softly. "You can't be serious," Gwendolyn finally managed to say. "As a heart attack, dear. He's at the saloon now if you want to speak with him." Josephine stood, smoothing her skirts. "Just thought you should know your options before you lose everything." After Josephine left, Gwendolyn's mother reached for her hand. "We can't ask this of you, Gwen," she said, her voice breaking. "We'll find another way." But as Timothy's coughing echoed from the small back bedroom, Gwendolyn knew there was no other way. Not in time. "I need to meet this man," she declared, reaching for her shawl. The Silver Dollar Saloon blazed with light and noise, a stark contrast to the quiet darkness settling over the rest of El Dorado Canyon. Gwendolyn had never set foot in such an establishment before. Decent women didn't, but desperation pushed her through the swinging doors. Conversations faltered as she entered, men turning to stare at the slender young woman with auburn hair and determined green eyes who clearly didn't belong among the whiskey and card games. "I'm looking for Fletcher O'Malley," she announced, her voice stronger than she felt. A tall figure at the bar turned slowly. The cowboy couldn't have been more than 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a cloudless summer sky. His dark hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and a faint scar crossed his right cheekbone. His clothes, while dusty from the trail, were clearly of good quality. "I'm O'Malley," he said, his voice deep and even. "What can I do for you, miss?" Gwendolyn swallowed hard. "My name is Gwendolyn Nelson. I understand you're looking for a wife." The saloon erupted in whistles and catcalls, making her cheeks flame, but O'Malley's expression remained neutral. He nodded toward a quieter corner. "Let's talk privately." Once seated at a small table, away from prying ears, Gwendolyn explained her family's desperate situation. "So you're willing to marry a man you've never met to save your family's home?" he asked when she'd finished. "I'm willing to do what I must to care for my mother and brother," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or understanding. $500 is a lot of money," he said thoughtfully, turning his glass between his fingers. "I know, and I don't expect charity. If you pay our debt, I'll be a good wife to you. I can cook, so keep house." "And what about love, Miss Nelson?" he interrupted. "Aren't you hoping to marry for love someday?" The question caught her off guard. "Love is a luxury my family can't afford right now, Mr. O'Malley." He studied her for a long moment. "I'll pay your debt. And yes, we'll marry tomorrow before the deadline, but you should know why I'm doing this." Gwendolyn waited, her heart pounding. "I need a wife for appearances. I have business interests that would benefit from the stability marriage suggests, but I don't expect." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I won't demand anything from you that you don't freely give." Relief and confusion warred within her. "You want a wife in name only." "For now," he replied. "We'll be partners, Miss Nelson. Nothing more, nothing less. And if you wish to leave after a year, I won't stop you. I'll even provide you with enough money to secure your family's future." It seemed too good to be true, but Gwendolyn had no choice but to trust him. "Then I accept your proposal, Mr. O'Malley." They shook hands like business associates sealing a deal, and Fletcher insisted on escorting her home. As they walked through the quiet streets, Gwendolyn wondered what kind of man would marry a stranger with so few expectations. What was he hiding? And how would she feel when she discovered his secrets? The following morning dawned clear and bright, a cruel contrast to the storm of emotions raging within Gwendolyn. Her mother helped her dress in their small bedroom, tears streaming silently down her face as she fastened the buttons on Gwendolyn's best dress, a simple blue cotton that had been her Sunday church attire for the past 3 years. "You don't have to do this," Eleanor whispered, but they both knew it was an empty protest. "I want to," Gwendolyn lied, forcing a smile. "Mr. O'Malley seems kind." It was the most positive assessment she could offer of a man she'd spoken with for less than half an hour. A knock at the door announced Fletcher's arrival. He'd brought a wagon for their belongings along with his foreman, a weathered man named Hank, who would help with the loading while they attended to other matters. "First things first," Fletcher said after brief introductions. He handed Gwendolyn an envelope. "For Mr. Hargrove, the full amount plus interest." Gwendolyn took it with shaking hands. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he replied quietly. "We still have vows to exchange." They made their way to the small white church at the edge of town, where Reverend Phillips awaited them. The ceremony was brief, with only Gwendolyn's family and a few curious townsfolk as witnesses. When it came time to seal their union with a kiss, Fletcher merely brushed his lips against her cheek, a gesture that both relieved and oddly disappointed her. By noon, the debt had been paid, the marriage certificate signed, and Gwendolyn's few possessions loaded onto the wagon. Her mother and brother would follow in a few days, once arrangements could be made for their comfort at the ranch. "Ready, Mrs. O'Malley?" Fletcher asked, extending his hand to help her onto the wagon seat. The name sounded foreign to her ears. Mrs. O'Malley, a title she'd earned not through courtship and love, but through desperation and necessity. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, taking his hand. The journey to Fletcher's ranch took nearly 3 hours. At first they rode in silence, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creaking of the wagon the only sounds. Gradually, though, Fletcher began pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of information about the area. "That ridge there marks the boundary of O'Malley land," he said as they crested a hill. "Everything you can see from here to the mountains belongs to the ranch now." The scope of it took Gwendolyn's breath away. Unlike her family's small, struggling farm, this was a vast operation, hundreds of acres of good grazing land, dotted with cattle. "How long have you owned this ranch?" she asked, trying to learn anything about the man she'd just married. "Bought it 6 months ago from the previous owner, who was eager to return east." His tone suggested there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. "And before that, where are you from originally?" Fletcher was quiet for so long that Gwendolyn thought he might not answer. "Boston, originally. But I've been moving west for many years now, running from something or towards something," she asked boldly. A faint smile curved his lips. "Perceptive question, Mrs. O'Malley. Perhaps a bit of both." Before she could press further, the ranch house came into view, a substantial 2-story structure of solid timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings and a large barn completed the picture, along with a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. It was grander than any home Gwendolyn had ever lived in. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "It needs a woman's touch," Fletcher replied. "The inside is functional but sparse. You can change whatever you like." As they pulled up to the house, several ranch hands appeared, nodding respectfully to Fletcher and eyeing Gwendolyn with undisguised curiosity. "Boys, this is Mrs. O'Malley," Fletcher announced, helping her down from the wagon. "My wife." The words sent an unexpected shiver through Gwendolyn. His wife. What exactly would that mean in this strange arrangement? Fletcher gave her a tour of the house, which was indeed sparsely furnished but clean and well built. The kitchen was large and modern by Western standards, with an actual cook stove rather than just a fireplace. The parlor contained a few chairs and a small bookcase filled with volumes that Gwendolyn was eager to explore. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, including the master bedroom with its imposing 4-poster bed. "This will be your room," Fletcher said, showing her to a pleasant bedroom adjacent to the master suite. "I've had the housekeeper prepare it for you." Relief flooded through her. He truly did intend to honor his promise of a marriage in name only, at least for now. "Thank you," she said, setting down the small bag of personal items she'd carried with her. "I'll have your trunks brought up," he replied. "There's fresh water in the pitcher if you'd like to rest and refresh yourself. Dinner is at 6. With that, he left her alone in her new room, in her new life, with a stranger for a husband and an uncertain future stretching before her. Gwendolyn spent the remaining afternoon hours unpacking her meager possessions and exploring the house more thoroughly. The building was solidly constructed, with thick walls that kept out the desert heat. Large windows allowed for ample light, and to her delight, she discovered a small library off the main parlor, filled with books on every subject imaginable. As she ran her fingers along the leather-bound spines, a title caught her eye: "Medical Treatments and Remedies for Common Ailments." She pulled it down immediately, thinking of Timothy's persistent cough. Perhaps here she might find something to help her brother when he arrived. Lost in reading, Gwendolyn barely noticed the time passing until a soft knock at the door startled her. "Mrs. O'Malley." "Dinner will be served shortly." The voice belonged to an older woman with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes, who introduced herself as Mrs. Garcia, the housekeeper. "Thank you," Gwendolyn said, carefully marking her place in the book. "I'm afraid I've lost track of time." "It happens to the best of us," Mrs. Garcia replied with a warm smile. "Mr. O'Malley mentioned you enjoy reading." The library was his first project when he bought the place, had books brought in from as far as San Francisco. This information surprised Gwendolyn. What kind of rough cowboy prioritized books over other comforts? It was yet another piece of the puzzle that was Fletcher O'Malley. In the dining room, Fletcher awaited her, standing as she entered. The table was set with fine china and silver that seemed at odds with their rustic surroundings. "I hope you found everything to your liking," he said, pulling out her chair. "Yes, thank you. Your library is impressive." Gwendolyn settled into her seat, feeling suddenly awkward. This was their first meal as husband and wife, yet they were virtual strangers. "I believe books are windows to worlds we might never see otherwise," he replied, taking his own seat. "Which ones captured your interest?" "I found a medical text that might help my brother. Timothy has had a cough for months that won't seem to clear." Fletcher's expression grew serious. "There's a good doctor in Carson City, about a day's ride from here. When your brother arrives, we should have him examined." "That's very generous, but he's my family now, too," Fletcher interrupted gently. "At least on paper." Mrs. Garcia served a dinner of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from the kitchen garden. The food was delicious, but Gwendolyn found it difficult to eat with the weight of so many unasked questions pressing upon her. Finally, as they were finishing their meal, she gathered her courage. "Mr. O'Malley, Fletcher, please," he corrected. "We are married, after all." "Fletcher," she amended. "I feel I should understand more about our arrangement. You've married a complete stranger and paid a substantial sum to clear my family's debt." "Why?" He set down his fork, considering her question. "As I mentioned, I have business interests that benefit from the appearance of stability that marriage provides. But there's more to it." He paused, taking a sip of water. "I know what it's like to face losing everything. Your determination to save your family reminded me of someone I once knew." His eyes held a shadow of old pain, and Gwendolyn sensed there was much more to the story, but he didn't continue. "And what exactly are these business interests?" she pressed. A slight smile curved his lips. "Curious, aren't you?" "I'm negotiating with the railroad to bring a line through our property. Having a wife, a stable home, these things matter to the Eastern investors I'm dealing with. So I'm just for show, to be paraded before investors when necessary." The thought stung more than it should have. "Not at all," Fletcher replied quickly. "You're my partner in this venture, Gwendolyn. I expect you to have opinions to help make decisions about the ranch and our future. I merely meant that our marriage serves multiple purposes." She wasn't entirely convinced, but at least he seemed to value her mind, which was more than many husbands could say. "And after a year?" she asked. "You mentioned I could leave if I wished." His eyes held hers steadily. "If after a year you find this arrangement unsatisfactory, I'll provide you with enough money to establish yourself and your family comfortably elsewhere. You won't be trapped, Gwendolyn. I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice reassured her somewhat, though questions still swirled in her mind. Who was this man really? What secrets lay behind his generous offer? And could she truly build a life with someone she'd married out of necessity rather than love? As if reading her thoughts, Fletcher spoke again. "I suggest we use this year to get to know each other properly. Perhaps we can start with an honest conversation each evening. No obligations, no expectations, just truth." It was a reasonable suggestion, and Gwendolyn nodded her agreement. Truth is a good foundation, even for a marriage as unusual as ours. After dinner, they moved to the parlor, where Fletcher surprised her by producing a small gift, a journal bound in soft leather. "For your thoughts," he explained. "Everyone needs a private place for those." Touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture, Gwendolyn thanked him sincerely. As the evening drew to a close, Fletcher escorted her to the foot of the stairs. "Sleep well, Gwendolyn," he said, his voice soft in the quiet house. "Tomorrow we can begin learning how to be married." That night, lying in her new bed in her new home, Gwendolyn wrote her first entry in the journal. "Today I married a stranger to save my family. Fletcher O'Malley is a mystery kind yet distant, generous yet guarded. I do not love him nor he me, yet we are bound together now. Perhaps, in time, we will find friendship if nothing else. For now, that must be enough." The following week passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery for Gwendolyn. Each day brought new revelations about her husband and the ranch that was now her home. Fletcher rose before dawn each morning to work with his men, returning for breakfast that Gwendolyn insisted on preparing herself, despite Mrs. Garcia's willingness to continue handling all the cooking. Gwendolyn had always found peace in the kitchen, and maintaining this one aspect of normalcy helped her adjust to her new circumstances. During these early morning meals, they would discuss the day ahead. Fletcher never treated her as a mere ornament, but included her in conversations about ranch operations, explaining the cattle business and listening to her suggestions with genuine interest. "The vegetable garden could be expanded," she mentioned on the third morning. "And perhaps we could add a few fruit trees near the house. In a few years, they'd provide both shade and food." "An excellent idea," Fletcher had agreed. "Draw up what you have in mind and we'll set the men to work on it next week." By the fifth day, Gwendolyn's mother and brother had arrived, installed in comfortable rooms on the first floor to accommodate Timothy's weakened condition. The young man's cough had worsened during the journey, and Fletcher immediately arranged for the doctor from Carson City to visit. Dr. Wilkins diagnosed Timothy with a severe bronchial infection and prescribed a regimen of rest, fresh air, and herbal treatments. Fletcher spared no expense, sending for medicines all the way from San Francisco. "You don't have to do all this," Gwendolyn told him privately after the doctor left. "We can't possibly repay. You owe me nothing," Fletcher interrupted firmly. "Your brother's health isn't a debt to be calculated." The simple statement, delivered without expectation of gratitude, touched something deep within Gwendolyn. This man who had married her as a business arrangement was treating her family with more genuine concern than she had dared hope for. As promised, each evening after dinner, they would spend time in honest conversation, gradually revealing pieces of themselves to each other. On the 8th night of their marriage, as they sat in the parlor with cups of coffee, Fletcher asked, "What was your father like?" Gwendolyn smiled sadly at the memory. "Kind but flawed. He loved us dearly, but he was always chasing the next big opportunity. He truly believed that his last gamble would be the one to secure our future." "And instead it left you with his debts," Fletcher observed. "Yes, but I can't blame him entirely. The drought destroyed our crops for 3 consecutive seasons. He was desperate." She looked up at Fletcher. "What about your parents?" A shadow crossed his face. "My father was a businessman in Boston. Cold, calculating success was all that mattered to him. My mother was gentle but weak-willed. She never stood against him, even when she should have." "Is that why you left the East?" Fletcher's gaze grew distant. "Partly. My father had my life planned out: Harvard, marriage to a suitable society girl, eventual takeover of the family business. I wanted something different. When my younger brother died in an accident, I couldn't bear to stay. The West seemed like a place where a man could define himself by his actions, not his name or his inheritance." It was more than he'd shared before, and Gwendolyn sensed there was still much he wasn't telling her. But it was a glimpse into what had shaped the man she'd married. As the days turned into weeks, Gwendolyn found herself settling into life at the ranch. Timothy's health improved gradually with proper care and nutrition. Her mother, initially stiff and formal with Fletcher, warmed to him as she witnessed his generosity and kindness toward her children. Gwendolyn began making the house truly her own, rearranging furniture, adding touches of color with wildflowers from the surrounding meadows, and implementing her plans for the garden with Fletcher's full support. The ranch hands, initially wary of their boss's new wife, came to respect her practical nature and willingness to work alongside them when needed. One particular ranch hand, a young man named Charlie who couldn't have been more than 19, became almost like a second brother to her. He taught her to ride properly. Saddle was impractical on a working ranch and showed her the best spots for picking wild berries. "The boss is different since you came, madam," Charlie mentioned one afternoon as they rode back from checking a far pasture. "Happier, like? Different how?" Gwendolyn asked, curious about how others perceived her husband. "Well, he talks more, for one thing, even laughs sometimes. Before, he was all business fair but distant. Now he's more." Charlie searched for the right word. "Connected, I guess." The observation gave Gwendolyn much to think about. Was she truly having an effect on Fletcher, or was he simply growing more comfortable in his role as a rancher? That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, she decided to be direct. "Charlie thinks you've changed since I arrived," she said, glancing at Fletcher's profile. "He says you're happier." Fletcher considered this, his eyes on the horizon. "Perhaps I am. This place felt empty before, despite all the activity. Now it feels like a home. Because of me." The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. Fletcher turned to her then, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "Yes, Gwendolyn, because of you." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that their arrangement was evolving into something neither had anticipated. Fletcher reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand in his touch warm and steady. They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to appear, neither withdrawing their hand, neither needing words to acknowledge that the partnership they had agreed to was becoming something more. Later that night, writing in her journal, Gwendolyn admitted what she had been reluctant to face. She was beginning to care for Fletcher O'Malley not out of gratitude or obligation, but because of the man he was revealing himself to be. As summer turned to autumn, life at the O'Malley Ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Timothy's health continued to improve, and he began helping with light ranch duties, finding purpose in the work. Fletcher Nelson discovered a talent for preserving fruits and vegetables from Gwendolyn's now thriving garden, her jars of preserves becoming sought-after items at the general store in town. Gwendolyn and Fletcher's relationship deepened gradually through their daily interactions and evening conversations. They discovered shared interests in literature and music. Fletcher had arranged for a piano to be delivered from San Francisco as a surprise for Gwendolyn, remembering her mention of piano lessons in her childhood. "It's too much," she had protested when the magnificent instrument arrived. "Nothing is too much for my wife," he'd replied simply, the warmth in his eyes making her heart flutter in a way she wasn't entirely prepared for. The turning point in their relationship came unexpectedly in late October. Fletcher had ridden out with several hands to check on cattle in the high pastures before the first snow. They were expected back before nightfall, but as darkness descended and temperatures dropped, there was no sign of the riders. Gwendolyn paced the porch anxiously, a lantern held high to guide them home, while her mother tried to reassure her. "They probably took shelter somewhere when they saw the weather turning," Eleanor suggested, but Gwendolyn could hear the worry in her voice as well. Just after midnight, as a cold rain began to fall, the sound of hoofbeats finally broke the silence. Gwendolyn rushed down the steps, heedless of the rain, as Fletcher and his men rode into the yard. Fletcher dismounted stiffly, his face pale beneath his hat. "Sorry to worry you," he managed before nearly collapsing. Only then did Gwendolyn notice the bloodstain spreading on his right side. "What happened?" she cried, rushing to support him. "Boss took a fall when his horse spooked at her rattler," one of the hands explained, helping guide Fletcher toward the house. "Hit some rocks pretty hard. They got him inside and onto the sofa in the parlor. Mrs. Garcia quickly brought hot water and clean cloths, while Gwendolyn carefully removed Fletcher's coat and shirt to reveal a deep gash along his ribs and significant bruising. "The doctor," she began, but Fletcher shook his head. "Roads will be too muddy in this rain. It's not as bad as it looks." Working with steady hands despite her racing heart, Gwendolyn cleaned the wound, stitched it closed using skills learned from necessity on the farm, and bound his ribs tightly. Throughout her ministrations, Fletcher watched her face, his eyes never leaving hers even when the pain must have been considerable. "You're good at this," he murmured as she finished. "I've had practice," she replied, smoothing a hand over the bandage. "My father was forever getting himself injured in one way or another." When she tried to move away, Fletcher caught her hand. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly, so only she could hear. "Not of the injury, but of not making it back to you." The simple confession, spoken in a moment of vulnerability, broke through the final barriers around Gwendolyn's heart. Without thinking, she leaned down and pressed her lips to his, their first real kiss after nearly 3 months of marriage. Fletcher's uninjured arm came around her, holding her close for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. When they finally parted, his eyes held a question. "Stay with me tonight," he asked softly. "Just to sleep. I find I don't want to be alone." That night, Gwendolyn lay beside her husband in his bed, listening to his steady breathing, her hand resting lightly on his chest to reassure herself of his continued well-being. It was a turning point, an acknowledgement that what had begun as a marriage of convenience was transforming into something neither had expected but both increasingly desired. In the weeks that followed, their relationship blossomed. While Fletcher's injury healed, Gwendolyn took on more responsibility for the ranch operations, consulting with him daily but making decisions that earned her the respect of the ranch hands and her husband alike. They now shared the master bedroom, though physical intimacy developed slowly, both of them wanting to ensure that, when they finally came together as husband and wife in truth, it would be an expression of genuine feeling rather than obligation. On a crisp December evening, as they sat before the fireplace in their bedroom, Fletcher took Gwendolyn's hand in his. "I have something to confess," he said, his expression serious. Gwendolyn's heart tightened with sudden anxiety. Had she misread everything? "When I proposed our arrangement," he continued, "I told you that I needed a wife for appearances, for business reasons. That wasn't entirely true." "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. Fletcher's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "The railroad negotiations were real, but they weren't the primary reason I sought a wife. The truth is, I was lonely, Gwendolyn. I built this ranch, this life, but it meant nothing without someone to share it with." Relief flooded through her, followed by a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. "Why me?" she asked. "You could have courted any eligible young woman in the territory." "Because from the moment you walked into that saloon, head held high despite your circumstances, I saw something in you, strength, determination, and a depth of caring that I'd never encountered before." He shifted to face her fully. "I thought perhaps, in time, we might build something real together. I just didn't expect to fall in love with you so quickly." The words hung in the air between them, the first time either had spoken of love. Gwendolyn's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered, the truth of it resonating deep within her. "I think I began falling in love with you the day you told me I owed you nothing for helping my brother." Fletcher gathered her into his arms, and this time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, no holding back. That night, they truly became husband and wife, their bodies expressing what their hearts had already acknowledged. Later, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Fletcher whispered against her hair, "Thank you for turning a business arrangement into a marriage." Gwendolyn smiled, pressing closer to him. "Thank you for giving me time to see the man behind the proposal." As Christmas approached, the ranch buzzed with preparations. Gwendolyn was determined to make their first holiday as a family special, decorating the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, baking cookies from her mother's recipes, and organizing gifts for everyone, including the ranch hands. Fletcher watched her enthusiasm with amusement and love, often pulling her into his arms for impromptu dances around the kitchen, or stealing kisses as she hung decorations. "You've brought joy back into my life," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire, a rare snowfall dusting the world outside their windows. "I never expected to find that again." "Again?" Gwendolyn questioned, catching the word that suggested a previous happiness lost. Fletcher's expression grew distant, and she sensed he was finally ready to share the last of his secrets. "There was someone once," he began slowly. "Her name was Rebecca. We were to be married in Boston against my father's wishes. She wasn't from the right social circle, you see. When my brother died, my father used my grief to manipulate me to turn me against her. By the time I realized what he'd done, it was too late. She had married someone else." Gwendolyn squeezed his hand in silent support. "I left Boston then, unable to face what I'd lost through my own weakness. I drifted westward, working ranches in Texas, Colorado, anywhere that would have me. I was running from the pain, from the man I'd allowed myself to become under my father's influence. And now," Gwendolyn asked gently, "now I'm no longer running." He brought her hand to his lips. "You've given me a reason to stand still, to build something lasting. You've helped me become the man I always wanted to be." On Christmas Eve, with Timothy and Alina, Mrs. Garcia, and all the ranch hands gathered in the decorated parlor, Fletcher surprised everyone with an announcement. "I have gifts for everyone," he began, "but first, I have something important to say." He turned to Gwendolyn, taking both her hands in his. "When we married, it was under unusual circumstances. You needed help and I needed a wife. But what began as an arrangement has become the greatest blessing of my life." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a delicate gold ring set with a perfect diamond, surrounded by tiny sapphires that matched his eyes. "I should have given you a proper ring from the start," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Gwendolyn Nelson O'Malley, I love you with all my heart. Will you continue to be my wife, not out of necessity but out of love? Will you renew our vows before God and our family, this time with our hearts fully engaged?" Tears streamed down Gwendolyn's face as she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The room erupted in cheers as Fletcher slipped the ring onto her finger and sealed their renewed commitment with a kiss. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Gwendolyn held her husband close, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I never imagined that being forced to wed a cowboy would lead to such happiness," she whispered against his chest. Fletcher's arms tightened around her. "And I never imagined that paying a family's debt would earn me a treasure beyond price." As the new year of 1876 dawned, Gwendolyn and Fletcher renewed their vows in the same small church where they had first married, this time with their hearts full of the love that had grown between them. Timothy, now healthy enough to stand as Fletcher's best man, beamed with pride, while a leaner dabbed at tears of joy rather than worry. The O'Malley ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. The railroad deal that Fletcher had been negotiating came through, bringing increased prosperity to the entire region. With some of the proceeds, they established a small school on the ranch for the children of their workers and neighboring families, with Gwendolyn often serving as teacher. By the following spring, Gwendolyn had news of her own to share. Standing in their garden among the blooming fruit trees they had planted together, she took Fletcher's hands and placed them on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a child," she told him, her eyes shining. The joy that transformed Fletcher's face was answer enough, but he swept her into his arms anyway, spinning her in a circle before setting her gently back on her feet. "A child," he repeated in wonder. "Our child." "The first of many, I hope," Gwendolyn replied with a smile. "As many as you wish," Fletcher promised, kissing her softly. This ranch was built for a family to grow and thrive. On a warm October day in 1876, their first child was born, a son they named James Timothy O'Malley, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. As Fletcher held his son for the first time, the last shadows of his past seemed to lift completely. "He's perfect," he whispered, sitting beside Gwendolyn on their bed. "You're perfect. How did I get so lucky?" "It wasn't luck," Gwendolyn replied, reaching up to touch his face. "It was courage, yours in offering a strange arrangement to a desperate woman, mine in accepting it. And then it was patience and honesty that allowed love to grow where only necessity had planted the seeds." Over the next 5 years, the O'Malley family continued to grow and flourish. A daughter, Elizabeth Leaner, joined them in 1878, followed by twins Robert and Richard in 1880. The ranch expanded, with Fletcher acquiring adjacent properties to accommodate their growing herd. El Dorado Canyon itself changed with the coming of the railroad, growing from a struggling settlement into a bustling small town. Fletcher and Gwendolyn became respected community leaders, with Fletcher serving on the town council and Gwendolyn organizing efforts to establish a proper hospital. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they stood on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Fletcher wrapped his arms around Gwendolyn from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Remember when I said you could leave after a year if you wished?" He murmured against her ear. Gwendolyn laughed softly. "I remember, though I think that offer expired long ago." "Indeed it did, the moment I realized I couldn't live without you." He turned her in his arms to face him. "I thank God every day for bringing you into that saloon looking for a husband." "And I thank God that the husband I found was you," she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. From their humble beginnings, a desperate young woman forced to wed a mysterious cowboy to pay her family's debt, they had forged a love story that would become legend in El Dorado Canyon, a testament to the power of second chances and the unexpected ways that love can take root and flourish, even in the most barren of circumstances. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the same rich colors as on the day they'd first met, Fletcher and Gwendolyn stood hand in hand, surrounded by the life they'd built together, a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined on that fateful day when a stranger had said, "You owe me nothing," and in doing so, had given everything. In the spring of 1885, 10 years after their unlikely marriage began, Fletcher and Gwendolyn sat together on their porch swing, watching their 4 children play an elaborate game of their own invention in the front yard. James, now 9, had grown into a thoughtful boy with a natural gift for working with animals. 8-year-old Elizabeth showed early signs of her mother's determination and her father's business acumen, already keeping careful accounts of her small flock of chickens. The 5-year-old twins, Robert and Richard, were bundles of energy who could barely be told apart except by their parents and siblings. "Can you believe it's been a decade?" Gwendolyn asked, leaning her head against Fletcher's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," he replied, his arm tightening around her. "Other times, I can barely remember what life was like before you. Much had changed in those 10 years. The O'Malley Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in Nevada. With Fletcher's innovative breeding techniques and Gwendolyn's sharp management skills, creating a formidable partnership. The railroad spur that had been merely a negotiation when they married now ran directly to their property, allowing them to ship cattle more efficiently than ever before. El Dorado Canyon had grown too, from a dusty outpost to a proper town with a school, church, several businesses, and even a small newspaper, the El Dorado Gazette, which Gwendolyn Nelson had surprised everyone by helping to establish. Now a respected editor despite her initial lack of experience, Gwendolyn had found a second chapter to her life that no one, least of all herself, could have predicted. Timothy, now 26 and fully recovered from the illness that had nearly claimed his life, managed a successful freighting business that transported goods throughout the territory. He had recently become engaged to the schoolteacher, Miss Sarah Williams, with a wedding planned for the summer. "I was thinking," Fletcher said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about taking the whole family east next year." Gwendolyn looked up in surprise. Fletcher had never shown any interest in returning to his roots. "To Boston, to see your father," Fletcher nodded slowly. "He's getting old, according to his last letter. I think it's time to make peace, and I want him to meet his grandchildren before it's too late." The mention of Fletcher's father made Gwendolyn tense slightly. Though Fletcher had reconnected through occasional letters over the years, the senior Mr. O'Malley remained a distant figure who had never acknowledged their marriage or the existence of his grandchildren. "Are you sure?" she asked cautiously. "I am," Fletcher replied firmly. "Not for his sake, but for mine, and for our children. They should know where part of their heritage comes from, even if it's not a perfect legacy." Gwendolyn squeezed his hand in understanding. "Then we'll go, as a family." The decision to visit Boston set in motion preparations that occupied much of the following months. The children were beside themselves with excitement about the train journey and seeing the ocean. Gwendolyn, though she tried not to show it, was nervous about meeting the formidable O'Malley patriarch and navigating the society that Fletcher had left behind. In April 1886, the family boarded an eastbound train, beginning a journey that would take them across the continent. For Gwendolyn, who had never traveled beyond Nevada and neighboring California, each new state brought wonders to behold. The children pressed their faces against the windows as the landscape changed from desert to prairie to forest, asking endless questions that Fletcher patiently answered. When they finally arrived in Boston, they were met at the station by a dignified older man who introduced himself as Jennings, the O'Malley family butler. A carriage bore them through streets lined with elegant brick buildings, unlike anything Gwendolyn had seen before, finally stopping before an imposing mansion in Beacon Hill. "This is where you grew up," Gwendolyn whispered to Fletcher, suddenly conscious of her practical traveling clothes and Western mannerisms. "It was a house, not a home," Fletcher replied quietly. "You've shown me the difference." Frederick O'Malley awaited them in a book-lined study, a once powerful figure now diminished by age but still radiating authority from his wheelchair. His resemblance to Fletcher was striking, though his eyes lacked the warmth that Gwendolyn so loved in her husband. "So you've finally returned," the old man said, his voice surprisingly strong. His gaze swept over Gwendolyn and the children with an assessing look that made her want to gather her brood and flee. Fletcher stood straight, his hand finding Gwendolyn's. "Father, may I present my wife, Gwendolyn, and our children, James, Elizabeth, Robert, and Richard." "Step forward, children," Frederick commanded. "Let me see you properly." To Gwendolyn's surprise, as the children cautiously approached their grandfather, the old man's stern expression softened fractionally. "They have the O'Malley look about them," he conceded, focusing particularly on James. "Especially this one." James, always the most diplomatic of their children, stepped forward with his hand extended. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. Father has told us about the shipping business you built." Something that might have been approval flickered in Frederick's eyes as he shook the boy's hand. "Has he indeed? And what else has your father told you about me?" Before Fletcher could intervene, James replied with disarming honesty, "That you wanted the best for him but sometimes couldn't see that your way wasn't the only way to success." A startled laugh escaped Frederick, perhaps his first in years. "Out of the mouths of babes," he murmured. "Your son has your directness, Fletcher, but perhaps his mother's tact." The tension in the room eased slightly, and what had begun as a formal, potentially hostile reunion gradually transformed into something resembling a family gathering. While Frederick O'Malley would never be an effusive man, over the course of their 2-week stay, Gwendolyn observed subtle changes in his interaction with Fletcher and the children. On their last evening in Boston, after the children had been put to bed, Frederick asked to speak with Fletcher and Gwendolyn privately. "I was wrong," he said without preamble, the words clearly difficult for him. "About many things, but particularly about what would bring you happiness, Fletcher." Fletcher sat very still, his face a careful mask that Gwendolyn recognized from their earliest days together, the expression he wore when emotions threatened to overwhelm him. "I've watched you this past fortnight," Frederick continued. "The man you've become, the family you've built." His gaze shifted to Gwendolyn. "The wife you've chosen. It's clear you found your proper path, despite my interference." "Thank you for acknowledging that," Fletcher replied, his voice steady. "It means more than you might guess." The old man nodded, then reached for a folder on his desk. "I've had my solicitors draw up these papers. The Boston house and business will still go to your cousin, William. He's been running things effectively in my stead for years. But I've established a trust for your children's education and set aside a significant investment fund that you may use as you see fit to expand your Western enterprises." "Father, that's not why we came," Fletcher protested. "I know," Frederick replied simply. "That's precisely why I'm doing it." As they prepared to leave the next morning, Frederick took Gwendolyn aside while Fletcher supervised the loading of their trunks. "He wouldn't tell me how you met," the old man said. "Only that it was unconventional and that you saved each other in different ways." Gwendolyn smiled, thinking of that desperate young woman who had walked into a saloon looking for a husband. "That's an accurate summary." Frederick studied her face. "Whatever the circumstances, you've given my son what I never could acceptance for who he truly is, not who I thought he should be." He took her hand in his papery grip. "Take care of them, Mrs. O'Malley, and perhaps bring them east again while I'm still here to see how they grow." "We will," Gwendolyn promised, touched by this glimpse of the man beneath the stern patriarch. The journey back to Nevada gave Fletcher and Gwendolyn time to process the unexpected reconciliation and to plan for the future. With Frederick's investment, they could expand the ranch, improve their breeding stock, and perhaps diversify into other ventures. "What would you think about establishing a proper school on our land?" Gwendolyn suggested as their train crossed the Mississippi. "Not just for our children and the ranch hands' families, but open to anyone in the area who wants education. Fletcher considered the idea. "With a library to rival the one in Boston?" he asked with a smile. "Naturally," she replied. "Knowledge shouldn't be confined to the East." By the time they returned to El Dorado Canyon, plans for the O'Malley School were well underway in their discussions. Timothy's wedding to Sarah provided a joyful focus for the summer, with the couple choosing to build their new home on a parcel of land that Fletcher and Gwendolyn gave them as a wedding gift, close enough for frequent family gatherings, but allowing the young couple their independence. As autumn approached, Gwendolyn had news of her own to share once again. On their 11th anniversary, after the children were asleep, she told Fletcher that their family would be growing once more. "At our age," he teased, though he was only 41 and she 33. "People will think we don't know how to control ourselves." "Let them think what they will," Gwendolyn replied, nestling against him. "I consider each child a blessing and a testament to what we've built together." Their 5th child, a daughter named Catherine Grace, arrived in the spring of 1887, completing their family. Unlike her siblings, Catherine had Gwendolyn's auburn hair but her father's striking blue eyes, a perfect blend of both parents. As the years continued to pass, the O'Malley Ranch and its extended family weathered the challenges and celebrated the joys that life brought their way. The school they established became a cornerstone of education in the region, eventually expanding to include the first college in the area. Their children grew into capable adults who carried forward their parents' values of hard work, integrity, and compassion. James, their eldest, eventually took over management of the ranch operations, introducing scientific farming methods he had studied during his time at an agricultural college in California. Elizabeth, with her sharp mind for numbers, became the financial backbone of the family businesses, expanding their interests to include a bank that specialized in providing fair loans to ranchers and farmers who might otherwise fall prey to predatory lenders. The twins followed different paths, Robert becoming a doctor who established the first modern hospital in El Dorado Canyon, while Richard's fascination with the law led him to a career as a judge known for his fairness and integrity. Catherine, the youngest, inherited her father's love of literature and her mother's determination, eventually founding a publishing house that specialized in works about the West, written by those who actually lived there rather than Eastern romantics. Through it all, Fletcher and Gwendolyn remained the steady center of the family, their partnership only deepening with each passing year. They returned to Boston several times before Frederick O'Malley's death in 1895, each visit easier than the last as genuine family bonds slowly replaced the formality of their early relationship. On a warm summer evening in 1900, as they celebrated their silver wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the extended family of ranch hands and community members who had become part of their circle over the years, Fletcher pulled Gwendolyn away for a moment of privacy on the porch of the home they had built together. 25 years, he marveled, holding her hands in his. "When I proposed our arrangement, I never dared hope for this." Gwendolyn's eyes, still as bright and determined as when she'd first walked into the Silver Dollar Saloon, sparkled with tears and laughter. "And I never imagined that being forced to wed a cowboy would be the best decision of my life." Fletcher touched the silver at her temples gently. "I meant what I said on our wedding day, though you couldn't have known it then. You have never owed me anything, Gwendolyn. Everything between us has been freely given, freely received." "And that," she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him as she had countless times over their years together, "is why what began as necessity became the greatest love story I could have imagined." As twilight settled over the Nevada landscape, they both had come to love. Fletcher and Gwendolyn rejoined their family celebration, their hands still clasped together not out of obligation or necessity, but out of a love that had transformed them both and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. In the years that followed their silver anniversary, Fletcher and Gwendolyn watched with pride as their children's children began to make their own marks on the world. The 20th century brought changes that would have seemed impossible when they first met, automobiles gradually replacing horses on the streets of El Dorado Canyon, telephones connecting their once isolated ranch to the wider world, electric lights replacing oil lamps in their home. Through it all, they adapted and evolved, just as they had throughout their marriage. When Fletcher's knees began to trouble him too much for horseback riding, Gwendolyn insisted on learning to drive their first automobile so they could still tour the vast expanse of their property together. When Gwendolyn's eyesight began to fail, Fletcher read to her each night, continuing their decades-long tradition of sharing literature and ideas. In 1910, at the age of 70, Fletcher suffered a mild stroke that left him with a slight weakness on his left side. Though he recovered well with time and care, the event made them both acutely aware of their mortality. "I've been thinking," Fletcher said one evening as they sat in the library he had built for her, now expanded to rival any collection in the West, about what legacy really means. Gwendolyn set aside her knitting. "In what sense, my love? We've built businesses, a school, a hospital. We've raised children who have gone on to accomplish remarkable things. But I keep wondering what will remain of us, of you and me, in 100 years. Gwendolyn considered his words carefully. "Perhaps it's not about buildings or even bloodlines. Perhaps it's about the values we've tried to live by: honesty, compassion, the courage to take chances on unlikely possibilities." Fletcher smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with the expression that had become more pronounced with age but no less dear to her. "Like a desperate young woman and a lonely cowboy finding love through an arranged marriage." "Precisely," she replied, reaching across to take his hand. "Our story matters because it reminds people that beginnings don't determine endings, that what starts as necessity can transform into choice, into love." The conversation stayed with them, and several months later, Fletcher surprised Gwendolyn by presenting her with a leather-bound book. Inside, he had begun recording their story from their first meeting at the Silver Dollar Saloon through the early years of their marriage. "I thought perhaps we could complete it together," he suggested, "for our grandchildren and their grandchildren after them." Over the next 2 years, in the evenings after the day's work was done, they collaborated on what they simply called the account. Fletcher would write some sections, Gwendolyn others, each bringing their unique perspective to the shared narrative of their lives. It became a project that energized them both, calling forth memories both sweet and difficult, reminding them of how far they had come from those first uncertain days of their arrangement. When the manuscript was complete, they read it aloud to each other over the course of several weeks, sometimes laughing, sometimes wiping away tears at the remembered joys and sorrows of their long life together. "You have any regrets?" Gwendolyn asked as they finished the final pages. "Anything you would change if you could go back?" Fletcher considered the question seriously, as he did all questions from his wife. "I regret the years of estrangement from my father, though we made peace in the end. I regret not recognizing sooner what a treasure I had found in you." He squeezed her hand gently. "But no, I wouldn't change our path. Every step led us here, even the difficult ones," she pressed. "Especially those," he affirmed. "They tested and strengthened what we were building together." In the spring of 1915, as the distant echoes of a European war began to reach even their corner of Nevada, Fletcher and Gwendolyn celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a gathering that brought together 5 generations of the extended O'Malley family, from Catherine's newborn son to the aging ranch hands who had been with them since the beginning. It would be their last major celebration together. That autumn, Fletcher contracted pneumonia after a sudden cold snap caught him unprepared during a ride to the far pastures. Despite the best efforts of their son Robert, now a respected physician, and a specialist brought in from San Francisco, Fletcher's condition steadily worsened. On a clear November morning, with the first dusting of snow visible on the distant mountains, Fletcher asked to be moved to the chair near the window of their bedroom. Gwendolyn sat beside him, holding his hand as they had held hands countless times over their 4 decades together. "Do you remember," he asked, his voice weaker but his eyes still bright, "when you asked me if I was running from something or toward something?" "I remember," she replied softly. "It was during our first journey to the ranch." "I've been thinking about that question," he continued. "I was running then from pain, from the man I'd been in Boston. But from the moment I met you, I've been running towards something instead, toward the life we built, the family we created, the love we found." He paused, gathering his strength. "I need you to keep running toward things, Gwendolyn, even when I'm gone." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded. "I promise." Fletcher's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "You know I meant it when I said you owed me nothing, but the truth is, I owe you everything. You made my life what it was meant to be." "As you did mine," she whispered. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the land they had tended and loved. When Gwendolyn realized that Fletcher's hand had gone still in hers, she did not call out or raise an alarm immediately. Instead, she sat with him a moment longer, saying a silent goodbye to the man who had transformed her life with an unlikely proposal 40 years earlier. Gwendolyn lived for another 12 years after Fletcher's passing, remaining active in the family businesses and community affairs well into her 70s. The manuscript they had written together was bound into books for each of their children and grandchildren, ensuring that the story of how an arranged marriage of necessity became a love story for the ages would never be forgotten. On her 80th birthday in 1927, surrounded by a family that now included great-great-grandchildren, Gwendolyn shared a final piece of wisdom gleaned from her remarkable life. "The greatest gift we can give each other," she told them, her voice still clear despite her years, "is the freedom to become our true selves. Fletcher gave me that gift when he said, 'You owe me nothing,' and in doing so he gave me everything." 6 months later, Gwendolyn Nelson O'Malley passed peacefully in her sleep, in the same bed she had shared with Fletcher for most of their married life. The school they founded grew into a respected university, and the town of El Dorado Canyon expanded into a city where their descendants continued to play important roles in business, education, and civic leadership. But perhaps their most enduring legacy was not the businesses they built, or even the family they created, but the story they lived and recorded, a reminder that love can take root in the most unlikely soil when tended with honesty, respect, and the courage to grow beyond the constraints of one's beginnings. In the family archives of the O'Malley clan, carefully preserved through the decades, the original manuscript of the account remains a testament to 2 people who found in each other not what they had been seeking, but what they truly needed. Its final lines, written in Gwendolyn's elegant hand, still speak to each new generation that discovers their story. "We began as strangers bound by necessity and ended as soulmates joined by choice." If you learn nothing else from our journey, know this: the greatest debts are those we joyfully choose to owe each other, not out of obligation, but out of love.